Didi by Shaheen Mystery. I reached to touch a rainbow today. I reached up high, so high, and yet as high as I reached up, I could not touch the sky. I will reach to touch a rainbow again. I will reach up higher than high. And if I reach up high enough, I just may skim the sky. I remember sitting on the wide veranda of our Indonesian home, writing little poems and notes in a carefully guarded diary. I would sit and watch little ants carry large loads, determined to get to their destination. What was my destiny? I was already 12 years old, but what had I achieved? It was 1983. We lived in Jakarta in a lovely white colonial home on a street that was quiet. It was a pleasant, almost perfect life until the day I was taken to visit an orphanage in the city. I do not remember how the orphanage looked, but I vividly remember the children. I was crying children. I saw crying children, laughing children, quiet children, screaming children, and I remember not knowing what to do. I returned to the orphanage every weekend. Perhaps it was merely curiosity or a sense of thankfulness for all that I had, or maybe every child's real desire to learn more about the world. My father was a banker who had to move cities. Growing up was a whirlwind of 10 schools across 5 countries that spanned the French, British, American, and international school systems. I began to understand that my life wasn't perfect during my summer vacations. My summers were spent between the orphanage in Jakarta and trips back to Mumbai, where I volunteered at the Happy Home and School for the Blind. I remember thinking of the beauty you can create when you look beyond what you can see. The school buzzed with confident children running up and down the staircases or playing cricket on the terrace with a ball that jingled. It was through these summer experiences in India that I began to see inequity. I would go from a family lunch to the dining hall at the blind school. I would watch through the window of my air conditioned car as children would beg in the streets. I would see piles of wasted food at a friend's party, and when I left, I would notice a woman sitting on the side of the road, portioning out all too meager amounts of dal and rice for her family. I started to see the slums of Mumbai as the fabric of the city. Suddenly, they appeared to be everywhere. I began to notice the disparity that existed in different people's lives. It was the summer of 1989. As always, I was on my vacation in India. On one blistering Mumbai day, my taxi stopped at a traffic signal. 3 children ran up my window, smiling and begging, and at that moment I had a flash of introspection. Nothing too unusual had happened, but as I looked at them, I suddenly knew that my life would have more meaning if I stayed in India. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about those kids and that moment. India was answering the search for purpose that I had felt ever since I was a child. I was being challenged to find my identity. I wanted to be part of making things better for children. I knew then that this could be my country and that whatever I did here could make more of a difference than in the manicured reality of my university life in the States. Nervously, a week before I was to return to Boston, I telephoned my parents to try and explain the jumbled feeling that culminated in my strong desire to move back to Mumbai. They listened carefully but advised me and cautioned that living in Mumbai would be vastly different from my current vacation. But when I persisted, they agreed on 2 conditions: that I would get admission into a good undergraduate college in the city, and later I would travel abroad for my graduate degree. The only place I could think to start was St. Xavier's, where my parents had studied. I walked into the crowded college office and asked for an appointment to see the principal. Admissions shut 3 months earlier, I was told, and the principal doesn't give appointments. I stood in the corridor outside the office, choking back frustration. A student standing outside witnessed the exchange between the principal's assistant and me. He came over and whispered with a wink, "There is a side door to the principal's office. You may want to try that." I went straight through the side door. Father de Cruz looked up quizzically and opened his mouth. But before he could say anything, I blurted out what I had rehearsed. "Father, my life is in your hands. I want to do something for the children of India. I don't know how, only that I must." He was curious enough to ask me a few questions, and at the end of our conversation, the father thankfully granted me admission to St. Xavier's College. The academic system at Xavier's was different from the system in the US. Here, a far more bookish form of learning replaced the academic rigor and intellectual stimulation I had received in Massachusetts. I quickly realized that I would be able to learn more in the city beyond the classroom. Now that I lived in India, I wanted to understand it in a different and deeper way than I had during my summer holidays. I walked around the city just watching and listening. One day, I walked into a sprawling, low-income community which was a maze of tiny alleyways buzzing with life. An estimated 10,000 people lived here with no running water, no system of waste disposal, and shared 6 dark cubicle toilets that lined an adjoining alley. I walked around that afternoon speaking with children, wondering how life would be different if each one of them only had access to the opportunities that would fill their greatest potential. Walking down the narrow passageways, I must have looked a little dazed when a soft spoken girl dressed in a beautiful sari welcomed me into her home. Her name was Sandhya. She was always also 18 like me. She didn't speak a word of English and I didn't speak a word of Hindi. But she smiled and laughed and chatted a lot, and I felt an immediate connection with her. Sandhya's life was so different from mine. Every day I would go to her house after college. Her home was smaller than the bathroom of my house. When a few children poked their heads inside the doorway to say hi to us, she welcomed them in. These children eventually formed the first class I would teach. Each day, a few more kids would crowd into the little home and ask to learn a few words in English, or a little math or a song. Even though I knew very little of India, I felt useful and confident. This became my routine. I would leave college as soon as I could and rush to my new world in the community. Here I saw truth and hope. The children would shout "Didi, Didi" excitedly when I went there. This was starting to feel like a lifelong commitment. Akanksha was born of the simple idea that India had people who could teach, spaces that could be utilized as classrooms, and the funds with which to educate all the children. Everything exists. I just need to find a way to bring all together. The people in the community wanted only 3 things: housing, water, and education. I realized that if I wanted the students to take school seriously, they needed an environment free of the community's distractions. So we started the search for our first Akanksha Center space. I approached 20 schools in the city requesting to give just one classroom in their school building for 3 hours every evening. All of them refused for the most illogical reasons. Some administrators claimed that the idea of teaching underprivileged children was way too revolutionary, while others complained they would spread diseases to the other students. A principal of a reputed school even complained how she simply couldn't allow the children into her school as the glass bangles worn by the daughters of the fishermen would scratch the desks of her classrooms. Finally, when I was almost ready to give up, the principal of the Holy Name High School in Colaba agreed to give a room. That became the first Akanksha Center. I mobilized volunteers from St. Xavier's to teach and made a rough plan of what they would teach. I just wanted the class to be a place where the children can feel safe, a space where they can leave the difficulties of their lives behind and just be children. Akanksha formally came into existence in 1991. From a single class with 15 children, Akanksha grew to 58 centers and 6 schools with over 3,500 children. The program developed very organically over years, like a soup made special by chefs tossing in what's needed after each tasting, a blend all its own. The stock ingredients were basic English and math to that, a dash of values, self esteem, and confidence. Thank you.